Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Land Development Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Glick. If this is your first time joining us, each week when you tune in, you'll hear one of a couple different types of shows. Sometimes when you tune in, you will hear an interview style show where we have on someone associated with the land development industry. We talk about their origin story, and then we dig into some of the projects that they've worked on over the years. And then other times when you tune in, we have industry news. That's where we pull up three different headlines. We talk about what it means for our industry. And during these episodes, as always, I have on with me Charles Covey. Charles, how's it going, sir?
Hey, how are you? Good to be here.
Yeah, today, as this thing releases, it is election day, the day that we've been talking about for quite some time now, because it has so many, the results, I should say, of the election have a lot of impact on the industry at large, the real estate industry and everything. So I guess I'll put this out there first before we dive into our articles that, a lot of you who are probably listening to this show on November 5th, get out and vote. Don't think that somebody else is going to do the voting for you. So if you have an opinion on things, get out there and vote. And if you don't vote, then I don't think you can complain about the results.
Right.
Well, with that said, a lot of the topics that, each week, obviously, when we do these shows, there's so many different articles to choose from. There's so many different things happening in all different areas of real estate and land development and everything. So trying to pick which articles are maybe some topics that we haven't covered before, or there's some topics that we have covered that we haven't covered for a while. So we want to kind of continue to follow the progress of certain things through. Today, we dig back into mortgage rates and what's been happening there, and then also look at a couple other topics related to just housing in general, and what are some of the things that could be leading to the housing shortage, or what are some of the potential solutions to those problems and everything. So definitely excited to dig into this. I know that the results of the election could play into some of these things, especially around different regulations and some of that, which we probably will get into a little bit as we talk through it, because I think one of the topics around, zoning is something that at least one of the candidates is opposed to. So just definitely be something interested to dig into when we get into that article. But otherwise, let's go ahead and jump into today's show here. We are looking at the first article. And actually, before I jump in, just since some of you, each week we get quite a few new people who listen into the show. So we actually record this with video as well. So if you're listening on a podcasting platform, you can head over to YouTube if you want to follow along. We pull up the articles, and you can watch us go through those. And when we have videos as well, like we do today, you can actually watch the video there. But regardless, if you listen in or watch, we're kind of available all over. So listen, whatever your favorite place is at. So first article comes to us from Fox Business. The headline reads, "Mortgage rates rise for fifth straight week. Average rate on a 30-year fixed mortgage surged to 6.72% this week." So like I said, this first one is a video that we're going to play here, and then we will go ahead and react. So let me go ahead and pull up the video.
David, let's talk about real estate, because I know you're trying to shine a spotlight on home prices, housing prices. You're highlighting that since 2019, housing prices have increased 48%. But there's kind of two sides to that coin. Whether you are trying to be a home buyer, a potential home buyer, or whether you're an existing homeowner, and whether that means, how do you kind of navigate both sides of that issue as you're understanding that national conversation?
Well, I love the question, because it allows me to make the point that I don't think on the other side of the coin, the homeowner, it's any kind of advantage at all unless you're a home seller. Someone merely holding a home that they can tell their friends is worth a higher price produces no economic benefit to anybody. If they do not plan to be homeless and they sell their home at a big profit, all that means is they have to go buy another home at an equally inflated and appreciated price. So the higher home prices our country got addicted to only become really economically beneficial to people when they're extracting the equity, like the silliness that we saw back in the early 2000s.
Right.
The problem is the other side of the coin, affordability. And I don't mean people at 24 years old with no money and, oh, they can't afford to buy a home. That's so unfair. I mean people that have a great job, great savings, great income, great credit, and they can't afford a home because of the artificial constraint on supply. That's what's caused this. It was made worse by very low rates for a long time,
right?
But now the numbers are what they are. It's out of control.
You brought up affordability, David. The Chamber of Commerce is doing a lot in terms of ads on 2025 and what that means for taxes. And the big issue on taxes is in 2025, much of the Trump tax cut sunsets. So these are not hypothetical questions about taxes. Something's going to happen next year. What do you make of the risk of those tax cuts actually going away?
Well, in the past, when we've had tax cuts that were to sunset, even when a new party was in charge, most of them don't sunset because tax increases are not popular for obvious reasons. After President Obama got reelected and he had a majority Senate and he didn't have to do anything at all, he let most of the Bush tax cuts continue. So regardless of who wins the election, I don't think a lot of these Trump tax cuts are going to sunset, but more of them will sunset if Harris wins than if Trump wins. That much is obvious.
David Bahnsen, always appreciate your insights. Thank you so much.
So continuing on from that, after that video here, there's a couple different sentences that are things that I pulled out of the article that weren't necessarily included in the video. So just reading from the article here, many would-be buyers and sellers are holding out to see if rates fall further. Currently, about 80% of mortgage holders have a rate below 5%, according to a Zillow survey. So that's obviously something we've covered quite a bit on the show, just about the amount of people out there who have these lower rates that aren't necessarily interested in going out and getting a higher rate. And then the article continues. The average rate on the 15-year fixed mortgage also rose to 5.99% from 5.71% last week. 1 year ago, the rate on the 15-year fixed note averaged 7.03%. So sizable increase over the last week. But when comparing to where we were at a year ago, we're obviously significantly down from that point. And it seems like not necessarily in this article, but from what I'd been reading, it feels like the market's reacting to just uncertainty around what's going to be happening the last couple months of this year. Also with the election, there seems to be, uncertainty around that. And even as this show comes out on election day, it feels like we're not going to know the results of the election, and plus the policies of, whoever ends up winning the election isn't going to be inaugurated until January. So it's not like anything is really going to happen with the results of the election. But I think people still want to know who's going to be there so that they can start, projecting of what, policies might come into play that could impact the industry and everything. But in general, what are your thoughts on this and what we're seeing with the mortgage rates and kind of how the market's reacting to it?
I'm not a big fan of this whole cycle that we go through every 4 years where we have to spend, there's a 4 or 5 or 6 month effect on the market because everybody's like, well, what about the election? Elections happen. They happen every 4 years. We're all used to it. Nobody's going to wake up on the 6th and say, you know what, my candidate didn't win. I'm going to give all my money back and I'm just going to leave. Doesn't happen. The money still has to move, business still has to transact, and the world goes on. The sun comes up tomorrow and it sets in the same place it did the day before, and all these things continue. So the whole thing about uncertainty in the market, I think it's all crap, but it is what it is. That's the scenario we have to deal with. So I'm not a fan of it personally, but and I definitely don't run my businesses that way with that level of trepidation around something that we can't affect. So anyway, I think that it's real in the market. We're seeing those uncertainties priced in, and all of the data shows that 9 out of the last 11 elections we had interest rates decrease, home interest rates decrease over the months following the inauguration. So that's what I would expect to happen. Looks like we're set up for that. So once we get the decision made, whoever's in place, then everything can continue. So I think in January, February, we see a lot of this whole uncertainty in the marketplace work itself out, and everybody gets back to business as they
Yeah,
should.
and I mean, yeah, and the affordability conversation in general is something that we're going to cover here in the in one of the next two articles and everything, because I think that continues to be an interesting topic, because we do have differing views on just in general, like people have differing views on how we get there, on what makes the most sense to help with some of that. And I'm going to put it in the show notes for this episode. I'm going to put the link to it, but we're not necessarily covering it here. There was a really good video that I came across from the New York Times, or not New York Times, I think it's the Wall Street Journal, that where I saw it. But they walk through the different areas of where potential changes could happen, from the land all the way through to the actual sale of the home, and what areas could there actually be something that the government could do, or like what impact, because the purpose of the video was, hey, what are Trump's policies, what are Harris's policies or proposed policies, and which of those different spots in that sequence of events, where do their policies fall and impact. And anyway, it was too long of a video to put on here for us to actually share, but I'll put the link to it because I think it's a worthwhile watch. I think it was like 7 or 8 minutes, so it's not super long, but definitely an interesting to see some of those areas, especially for people that are kind of looking at this and saying, well, what can a politician actually do, and what should the federal government do versus your state and local governments? It's like you have all these layers of government, and so trying to figure out which level really should play a role in some of these different areas and stuff is also that video points that out and makes it's kind of a good thing to think about, right? Because we do have to decide, what's the purpose of the local government versus when should the federal government come in, and so on. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that because I'll throw it into the show notes if for those of you listening in. This episode of the Land Development Podcast is brought to you by Groove Land Acquisition and Deal Management Software. Groove makes it easy for your team to stay aligned on every deal in progress, bringing transparency to everyone involved. Imagine having all of your notes, documents, and deal details accessible from a single central map. Whether it's a quick update or tracking a new property, Groove keeps the whole team in sync from start to finish. Sign up for your free trial at letsgroove.com/signup. That's letsgroov.com/signup. All right, let's get back to the episode. With that said, let's go ahead and get on to the next article here, which also has to do with affordable housing. This one's related to rentals and comes to us from Globe Street. The headline reads, affordable rentals vanish, sub $1,000 apartments now just 7.5% of the market. Apartment rents are rising at an accelerating rate. So reading from the article, an accelerating surge in apartment rents is tightening the squeeze on the most affordable segments of the U.S. rental market, according to a new report from Redfin. Renters seeking apartments under $1,000 a month are increasingly struggling to relocate to as rising costs force them to stay in place longer, and the number of new listings continues to dwindle. The analysis, which used data from the U.S. Census Bureau, found that the fraction of renters in this demographic declined from 50.4% in 2012 to 35.2% in 2022 and to 32.1% last year. Redfin attributed the decline in listings to a boom in asking rents after the pandemic, which led to rents stabilizing near their record highs soon after. The fraction of apartments listed for less than $1,000 a month has dropped to 7.5% this year, according to data from Redfin and Rent.com. 2 out of every 5 renter households paying under $1,000 per month have been in their apartments for 5 years or more. This compares to those paying between $1,000 and $1,999 per month, and those paying between $2,000 and $2,999 per month. And I should add there, the percentage between $1,000 and $1,999 per month is 26.1%. And then between $2,000 and $2,999 per month is 17.2%. While some metros show a glimmer of hope with increased availability at lower price points, the overall trajectory points to a tightening market. The coming decade could see the continued erosion of this segment of the market, given the persistence of elevated inflation and the decline in new apartment construction. And so with this, I was actually, as we were preparing for this episode, I was kind of scrambling last minute trying to find I was wondering how long do people stay in apartments when they rent? Because one of the big arguments you get from people with just affordable housing, which we'll actually touch on a little bit in the next article, just related to zoning, but a lot of people say that you get less people investing in the community because apartments are short term, right? You're not buying and committing to the neighborhood and everything, but seeing these percentages here that I guess it's not necessarily the average, but 2 out of every 5 renter households paying under $1,000 are staying in their apartments for 5 years or more. I mean, that's quite a bit of time staying in the same apartment. But as the price gets higher, it tends to decrease, which is kind of interesting here. I'm not sure. I know you're heavily involved in the rental space, and what do you think as far as as these numbers continue to go up? Obviously, inflation does play a part in this because everything is more expensive. Do you think there's a place? I mean, is this $1,000 a month number something that we should be paying attention to? Is it something that we really should have an expectation that there's going to be apartments that are more than 7.5% that are, $1,000 or less?
This article's funny with the title. The $1,000 rentals vanished like yesterday. That's obviously not what happened. This has been taking place over decades. So that whole clickbaity thing is I just kind of laugh at that. But we clicked on it and we read it, and so I guess it works. But these things did not disappear overnight. This has happened over a long period of time, and there's a lot of reasons. Probably the first one is that when you have to do a project and you've got to go, it's going to take you 2 or 3 or 4 years to locate, entitle, and develop an apartment project. You could build something more affordable at $1,000 a month. It is actually doable. But from the developer standpoint, you don't make as much. There's not as much value added per square foot of dirt that you had to go through all this process on. And unfortunately, because the entitlement and the zoning and the process just takes forever and it's so laborious and so expensive, it really doesn't make financial sense. It's just not good business to serve this particular part of the market. And that's tough because while in business, it's not all about the money necessarily. We're not charity organizations. And so we have to make smart decisions. We have investor dollars that we have to give good returns on. And building $1,000 a month apartments right now it's not a scenario that we can in most cases justify. That could change. And I think the next article talking a little bit about zoning and some of those changes, like there are ways that we could positively affect the process. But at least right now in the regulatory environment that we have, it's very tough to justify that effort. So I think that it's a problem. And I think that affordable rentals are a big issue. The other side of that from a lot of people's perspective is that we've, as Americans, as our country has developed and become what it is, we've gotten pretty spoiled. And I think what a lot of people will accept as a good enough housing situation for them is not what they probably should accept based on what their budget dictates. And that feeds back to this whole thing of what the developer has to react to the market and develop. This $1,000 product, it can be done, but it's not fancy, and it doesn't have a big resort style pool, and it doesn't have all of these amenities that everybody demands. And a lot of cities don't want it there because it's those people. And it's just like this whole list of things that makes it very challenging. So from a developer's perspective, there's a lot of things stacked against us. Somebody like me who is very committed to solving the housing problem at scale, I would love to do some of these projects, but there's so many hurdles. It makes it damn near impossible to do because people don't want them there. And then there's all the market factors. So it is a solution. There are solutions. It could be solved, but we have to make some larger overarching changes in order to do that. And at least at this exact moment, I don't see them happening anytime soon. Although there is more interest in those changes today than at any point I've seen in recent history. So I would say there's a glimmer of hope that something like this could be solved at some level over the next number of years. I would say that there's going to be some efforts there in Texas in this legislative session, and in the next one, hopefully we see some things happen at the national level as well.
Yeah, you mentioned amenities, and that was something I was thinking about. It's, in order to get to that price point, most of the apartment complexes I see going up where I'm located, they tend to be they feel very upscale, and they seem like they have all those different amenities and everything. And so the rental rates and everything like that are not in this category. It's a higher price point and everything like that. So it does make me wonder, like, this is something I've internally battled with myself a lot, is like trying to understand, because with the affordability topic and, the subsidies and stuff that happen in certain spots, because it's just not truly possible, just given a lot of the hurdles and stuff like that, for developers to be able to come in and do some of these projects without them truly being a charity project. I guess, where do you stand on some of that stuff with respect to, government having to get involved and, essentially covering costs or doing some things to help developers be able to build some of this housing? Like, do you think that that's an area where the government can or should get involved to help with some of these different projects?
For sure. And the challenge though is that you see the rhetoric from the national level, sometimes from the state level. When you get to the local level, they live in those communities. And we talked about NIMBYism, not in my backyard. They generally want a housing solution, but they don't want it in their city. They just want it somewhere else. And you get all the cities saying the same thing. Yeah, we need to solve housing. It needs to be done. But we don't want it here because we don't like the way that looks. It's not a pretty new shiny thing in our city. And that just goes back to the topic of Americans are pretty damn spoiled. So we've got people that don't want to rent the $1,000 apartment because they don't have the money for the more expensive apartment, really. But they'll push their budget and do it because they feel like they deserve all of these nice things and these amenities. The cities are the same way. They feel like that their city should just be this perfect utopia and should be only beautiful, shiny jewels get built in their city. But that's not how the real world should work. But that's the scenario that we've created. And in our heads, we think that that's acceptable. And unfortunately, we are the problem and the solution here. People are like, oh, we have a housing problem, but somebody, or you are involved in the process in some way and you're affecting it. So it's just this larger consciousness that needs to adjust. It's not a one person thing. It's just not just government. This is every single individual has got to change their mindset on what we should and shouldn't be doing. If you go backwards, let's go back to the 40s, 50s, and 60s, especially post-depression. Let's say 50s and 60s. The U.S. was really cranking. There were a lot of good things going on. Housing was affordable, but our expectations were more realistic and reasonable. Cities allowed things to get built because they knew they needed housing. People lived in 800 square foot houses because that was plenty enough, and it was affordable, and it could be built at a rate that was not a giant portion of your income. So all of these things can be done. We've done it here before at scale in the United States. And somehow we got spoiled along the way, and we've caused a lot of problems for ourselves.
Yeah, I was wondering too, like, been doing a lot of reading just about the different sides of people about affordability and some of the zoning issues and everything. And, sprawl always comes up, right? So, there's concerns that I see people have with continuing to, buy land outside of the city and continue to buy more land because we're just spreading out with single family homes and everything like that. Down there in the DFW area, is that something that's been a problem down there with just the sprawl? And so being able to do more high density development would help with that? Or is, obviously in this country, we have a lot of land that's, unused land, but do you see that as being one of the factors as well playing into this?
It's a huge issue. And I would say the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex is maybe the worst sprawl in the country. It's an hour and a half to get from one side of this monstrosity to the other. DFW is enormous. It's much more spread out than it should be. And this goes back to a couple of specific things. You look at cities that had the big periods of their growth pre-automobile, and they're very compact. That's the European model as well. Like even small towns in Europe, they're all very compact. Everybody's right close to each other. The houses are right next to each other. And then if you had a farm, you went out and worked on your farm during the day, and you came back to the city. That level of compactness and density solves a lot of issues. Socially, it's very, very good because you got more interaction. You've got efficiencies because everything's a little bit smaller, everything's a little bit more compact, and you can walk. You don't have to have cars going everywhere. You don't have to have these giant, sprawling 6, 7, 8,000 square foot houses. You live in a more compact space. You're around the people and your family. Everybody's kind of all there. So that model worked in the U.S. for a long time too. And then we get the automobile, and all of a sudden, hey, it's no big deal. We can drive, 10 miles into work is a short trip, no big deal. And so everything starts to sprawl. And Dallas and Fort Worth hit their big growth periods post automobile. And so everything sprawled, and it's caused a lot of issues. And I think that long term, we're seeing more things go back to density. But it's tough to turn that, because now we've got all this sprawl and we've got all the utilities and the outlays for that. And in some cases, it's hard to create density, to go back and reinvent density. And so that is a challenge. Density in some cases can create value, and it can create a lower cost of living. So we don't have that solved. Texas has got a density issue, in my opinion. And a lot of people have gotten used to this idea of having all this space, and they love the feeling of all this space. And I have a big backyard and my dogs can go play. And that does create it's another factor that feeds into this affordability issue over time.
Yeah. And as you were talking there just a little bit ago, I was kind of thinking to myself, I'm like, I wonder what is driving the need for Americans to expect these larger homes too. Like, because one of the things that I was thinking was, I wonder what percentage of time people spend in their homes, like today versus in the past. I couldn't quickly find stats that go way back into like the 90s, 80s, 70s, and so on. But just looking at even from 2003 to 2022, a study that I found here showed that from 2003 to 2022, that we spent and we increased by 10% the amount of time that we spend at home. Because that was one of the things I was thinking, is that probably back in the day, I mean, you'd be out actually doing stuff versus, there's technology plays into this where people are at home. Work from home is also another thing that keeps people in their houses. And I don't know if that gives people this mindset of like, well, if I'm going to be home more, I want, a bigger house and more elaborate, setup and everything like that, which gives people that impression that they can't, make do in a house that is, less than a 3,000 square foot home or 4,000 square foot home or whatever they're building. I wonder how much of that it plays into it, and just as we've changed as a society and the way we use our homes and everything today. But to me, that just comes down to the architecture of the home and how it's set up and how it's designed and everything, versus just having a bunch more rooms. And like you said, the big backyard and everything like that. Just doesn't seem like that's a path toward affordability, if that's the way we continue to go.
It's the path. It's going the opposite direction of affordability. I talk about it pretty often. I think that we've become spoiled. And if you overlay the housing prices with wages, right? Those are very separate. They don't match. Like, that's a big issue. However, you go overlay housing prices with housing size, those are pretty closely correlated. Not exactly, but very close. So we kind of created this issue. And if a, husband, wife, 2 kids lived in an 800 square foot house, it's actually pretty affordable. So if you got to buy a 5,000 square foot house, no, it's absolutely not affordable for that, for that income rate. So we have created this issue. And if you think about what America was built on, and about achieving, and about the ability to go do anything and create the life that you wanted, and all of these great dreams that built America, those are also the things that hurt us in a lot of ways, because now we now we are a very developed country. We're a world power, and we have all of these great demands for what we need and want out of our lives, and it's not working. So this is an overarching big societal issue. You go to other places and people live a simpler life and they're okay living in a much smaller house, and you've got multi-generations that are close to each other. And so we've got this kind of screwed up societal scenario that I think plays out not well over the next 2 decades, because with the bigger house and with that sprawl, we get this disconnectedness in our society. So the fabric of our society gets pulled apart. Everybody's in their little silo of husband, wife, kids at their house, and they're not interacting. They don't have these family units. They don't have, you look at other societies, and it's very important for the women to get together and talk about the stuff that they talk about, and the guys to get together and talk about the stuff that they talk about on a daily or multi-time a week basis at a scale. And they eat together and they communicate together and they solve the problems of their day that way amongst themselves. And as Americans, we've lost this, and we see most other developed societies do this. We're not doing it. So there's an American problem here to solve. That's not something they talk about in politics. These are issues that don't come up. But that is a big issue. And I don't know the solution for that one, but I'm fascinated by it. And we're seeing it play out in a way that is negatively impacting so many different areas in real estate that we talk about. So this is a longer conversation that we're having, but I think it's really, really important. And it just underscores this bigger issue that I think we should probably touch on more often, because it's absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, no, for sure. And it's yes, it is a longer topic, and just thinking about there's so many things in this where we can dig into. But I know based on the time right now, we're already at about 30 minutes. So let's go ahead and move on to the third headline here, and we'll continue obviously to follow what happens here on the rental side, because when it comes to affordability, it's not just about people purchasing homes. There's also the rental side of it that we have to continue to follow and track. All right, so third article comes to us from CRE Daily. Texas housing shortage deepens despite record construction. Despite leading the nation in home building, Texas faces a worsening housing shortage that is inflating housing costs statewide. So reading from the article, historically, Texas has managed housing demand by building detached single-family homes in the suburbs, keeping housing costs relatively affordable. But experts, including David Garcia of Up for Growth, suggest that onward expansion can no longer address Texas's housing needs on its own. In urban centers, limited land availability and strict zoning rules hinder the development of denser, lower cost housing types like townhomes, duplexes, and smaller apartment complexes. Loosening these restrictions could ease the strain by making it easier to build multi-family homes and other affordable options. The housing shortages vary by region across Texas, with some cities making progress in expanding their housing stock. In Austin and Round Rock area, reduced its housing shortfall by a third, leading to a 16-month decline in rent. Despite this, the area remains short by nearly 24,000 homes. Houston and Dallas-Fort Worth saw their housing shortages grow despite greenlighting more construction projects than before the COVID-19 pandemic. And El Paso has seen a minor easing of its housing shortage, a unique trend within the state. Many housing advocates argue that restrictive zoning laws contribute significantly to the Texas housing crisis. While permissive toward single-family homes, Texas cities often restrict land for denser housing types, limiting the construction of affordable housing options. By adjusting these restrictions, cities could increase the housing supply and provide more affordable options for residents. However, zoning reforms face resistance. Neighborhood groups and existing homeowners often oppose denser housing developments, citing concerns over changes to community character and property values. And last part here, the Texas legislature is expected to address the housing crisis when it reconvenes in Austin next year. A major topic will likely be the extent of state intervention versus local control in setting zoning laws. Some advocates propose state-level mandates to ensure all cities contribute to solving the housing shortage, while others emphasize the need for flexibility at the local level to tailor solutions to community needs. So this fits right into what we were just talking about. This is obviously very specific to the Texas market, but I think this obviously could play out in other states in a similar way. I know you've had some involvement in this, of course, just because you live this and breathe this every single day. What are you seeing, and I guess what are your thoughts on what we need to see happen with some of the zoning restrictions?
We have a couple of really good use cases here. So if we're looking at what Florida's done recently with zoning, we've got Austin is doing a lot of zoning retraction. And then probably the best one is the city of Houston, which it hasn't had zoning. So this is a long-term scenario of very simple, like it's commercial or it's residential, and then let developers do what they do. So when you drive in Houston, I've spent some time down there recently, and you can definitely tell. Like you drive through some of the areas, especially when you see an area that is, maybe it's older and it's doing, it's upgrading, right? They're knocking down old stuff and building new stuff, and you can tell that there's no zoning, right? You don't quite have the same consistency, and every street doesn't look exactly the same. And I'll use the city of Frisco, Texas, as an example. Frisco has been just hyper controlled on what gets built there, even to the point that they go in and they mark up your elevations and tell you this kind of stone and that kind of, they go to the next degree. And you drive through Frisco and it's very consistent, and it's very, it's pretty to some people, but it's very expensive and it's almost impossible to develop there. You go to Houston and they don't have the housing shortage issues or the affordability issues that we see elsewhere. So it does appear that it's working. And I think if we look long-term at what are the levers that we can pull? We talked about a bunch of things on this podcast today. Like there are bigger societal issues and there's stuff we've got to solve. But what are the levers that we can efficiently pull at a government level to affect the problem in the near term? And zoning is definitely one that plays out on a big scale. And because we have these use cases, we've seen it. And so we know this to be true. And just based on my involvement with some bills that are going to go through the Texas legislature this coming year, there is a lot of interest in fixing what appears to be a zoning problem. And I don't know that happens this year to remove zoning, or this next session to remove zoning in its entirety. I don't see that, but I do think there are going to be some very big strides toward it. If it doesn't happen, there'll be very big strides toward it. I think that there's a couple of cases. In fact, you and I were talking about this one. There were several things that the legislature enacted last session, and these laws were intended to help development move faster and more efficiently, and really create a lot of value statewide. The problem is cities figured out, you know what? I mean, it is state law, but if we just if we push back long enough and let the courts drag this out for 3 or 4 years, developers have to move on and we'll get what we want. And there's an article, the city of College Station, Texas, told Senator Betancourt, basically, yeah, we know we're breaking the law. It's fine. It's just, what are you going to do about it? Like we've just figured out how to hack the system, and the laws that you passed last session don't have much teeth in them because we can just allow the system to drag them out and they get their way. So you've got some really pissed off legislators who, tried to do a good thing and create these new rules, and the cities are like, yeah, they're basically just giving them the middle finger and saying we don't care. So there's a bill that I'm involved with that is very short. It's one sentence, and it takes away the ability for cities to push this to the courts, and allows a summary judgment and those things to happen in 90 to 120 days. And it will radically change the way that things happen in Texas, because now all these laws that are already on the books now have some teeth in them. And now a city can't just drag it out forever. So that's big. Things like that need to happen. Zoning, though, I think is it's a problem in that it doesn't let the free market. The U.S. is built on the free market system, because if a developer does a bad project that shouldn't have happened, they're not going to do it again, right? They're not going to be able to get that financed again. It'll never happen again. So it's a one and done. So you need to let developers do what let the money move. And the free market is a beautiful thing when it's left to go unabated because it regulates itself. We don't really need all of these cities and jurisdictions trying to just, really control and keep their hands on everything. The free market will take very good care of itself. So give it some guardrails. Obviously, if you want your city to look a certain way, give it a few guidelines, and then let developers go. And that will oftentimes give a better result than having a city employee who may not be that well educated in the development space trying to regulate. So anyway, I'll get off my soapbox on that one because I could go for a long time. I have a very strong opinion on that, but yeah, I think some of these zoning changes are going to be enormous.
Yeah, this is definitely one of those things that we'll be following because I want to see how this all plays out and what the Texas legislature actually, does, or what the, what ends up getting passed. If there's other things that come to the table that haven't been talked about yet or that we aren't aware of yet, and things of that nature. So we'll continue to follow that as we go into the end of this year and especially the beginning of next year once the legislature gets back in session. So anything else that you wanted to add before we call it a show?
Well, this is a little bit longer episode, but I think we covered some really great stuff that we're going to dive into a little bit more. And we've covered this last year. We've covered a lot of stuff, kind of about rates and housing. But I would love for us to dive more into some of the deeper rooted social issues around this and kind of how that can work into our decision making in the commercial real estate and real estate space. So, very cool episode, and it's a big day. It's a big day in a lot of ways. So I think a lot of us are really fascinated to see how this turns out, and a lot of predictions that it may be a day or two before we know for sure. Either way, the money is still going to have to move, and we're still going to find lots of ways to be productive and to be profitable and to have impact, regardless of how that turns out. So I'm excited for the next year. I think that 2025 is going to be really phenomenal. I've said that for a while, and it's going to be good for all of us.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And not only a big day, but also just kind of looking again at the schedule of the Fed. But the Fed meets on the 6th and 7th. So that's basically after Election Day and the day after that. So the next episode that we record, we will be able to talk about what decision the Fed made at that time. Because I think there's still, I just watched a video before we started recording about someone from JP Morgan talking about how he still thinks there's going to be a quarter point rate reduction at each of the next two sessions. So
Wow, great.
I'll be interested. Yeah, I'll be interested to see if that really happens. So we will be talking about that, I'm sure, in our next episode. But I won't continue to make this episode longer. Appreciate you all tuning in as always. And get out and vote today if you're listening on the 5th. But otherwise, we'll talk to you guys next week.